everyone. I just sent the agenda in the chat, if you don't have it handy. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Great. It's good to see you guys. It's good to have, we have a good amount of people today, which is great. So first things first, I posted the meeting minutes on the website. Did you guys have a chance to review it? I will also send it here. How does it look?
I did, and it looked fine to me.
Okay, so you want a thumbs up for approving it?
All right.
Amazing. Okay. So I wanted to share with you guys, I met with Kevin Crossley from the BPDA, and I asked if he could come present about Article 80, and he said they don't really have anything worthy of presenting. He said that they were not in the final stages of Article 80, but he did send me something that I thought would be useful for us to review. So 1 second, I will open it up. Let's see. Here it is. Let me see. I'm gonna share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. Can you guys see it? Okay, great. So he sent me this this story map, and kind of summarizes everything that they have been working on. So obviously it talks about Article 80, development review, and who they've been talking to. So they've been talking to BPDA staff, community members, project proponents, so like landowners and developers. Here it says that their goals are to reform Article 80 because it's outdated, unpredictable, and it lacks transparency. So yeah, they want Article 80 to advance affordability, resilience, equity, align with the planning visions. They want it to be transparent, clear, and easy to engage with. I think similar conversations we've been having about Article 85, and in general, consistency. And they want a predictable process, which is something that Murray had discussed in his Article 85 presentation. So the project timeline shows that they are working on a draft action plan and they're going to release it in July. So they just started, which is why they said they don't have anything yet, because they just started working on the draft action plan. And they will be releasing that in July. And they asked me to talk to you guys about Article 85 and how it relates to Article 80, and Squares and Streets, so that I can write something up and share it with them so that they can implement it into the work that they do. And so I let him know we would be totally willing to have that discussion and write that up. And I don't know if you guys have the calendar, the Commemoration Commission calendar. Like, I don't know if you guys have it on your own calendar, but I added a hearing session that the zoning board is having. I think it's next week. It's next Wednesday. And I added that onto the calendar with their agenda, because they are going to be discussing some changes or implementations or suggestions that people have for Article 80 or Squares and Streets. I think I'm not sure which one, but I did add that to the calendar just in case you guys wanted to go and check it out. So their phase 1 of listening and research, they do an overview of it. They held a lot of focus group sessions with community members, with BPDA staff, and this here with Article 80 steering committee, which I think we should still have somebody, still try to get in contact with them. And they did a peer city research into best practices, and they reviewed like Toronto, Detroit, Miami, Philly, just to see what kind of practices they had. Some cities had incentives, other cities had more similar practices to Boston. And they do not have a link to the existing conditions report because I would have sent that ahead of time. So that's their first part. Then they go into detail about phase one. So they got 2,500 responses, and here's what I found very interesting. The way that the BPDA engages with community members is not representative of the Boston population. They created a new survey to target more people in Boston, and they found that they were able to connect with 88% renters, 80% non-white, and 40% under 35. But their traditional methods for surveying people attracted 75% homeowners, 80% of the white population that completed the survey. 56% of them were over 55, and 70% were long-term residents. And then they give you the statistics of the city of Boston overall. So it's a large disparity with their regular practices to what the population of Boston actually looks like. So yeah, I mean, the responses are, I think, what we expect them to be. They think that the BPDA is hard to connect with. They think the BPDA doesn't advertise well. They don't have enough resources or time to attend the meetings that the BPDA hosts. And so yeah, it says that they are interested, but there are barriers to participation. And they did a community experience and mitigation survey. People they want more options to engage, which is true. Only 27% understand how their input matters. And they think that the BPDA should adopt a more standardized approach to mitigation. And they think that their impact advisory groups and their committees in general are not transparent. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my nephew's home. They also did a survey for developers. It only got 97 responses. But the developers felt that the current process isn't predictable. Not that many developers find advisory groups to be consistent or beneficial, and that the mitigation process is not consistent. So of the people who responded to this survey, they have similar feelings about the BPDA's processes as constituents do. And they have focus groups. I think they asked what did the engagement that the BPDA did with these communities, what did that change? Because they don't report on the post project. I think that's part of the focus groups essentially stated that they needed more transparency from the BPDA. And then they have a phase one for learning. This is their best practices report. They have a map for their engagements, mitigations. This is what I was talking about. They say like Cincinnati doesn't have a formal impact fee or mitigation system. Philadelphia uses incentives to push development to incorporate public amenities on site. Incentives include height, setback, and unit count bonuses. So yeah, I don't want to go through all of that, but that's essentially what they did. And then I think what Kevin really wanted to share was emerging themes and ideas, because I think that's where he felt like there was focus and where they're going to be developing their next steps. So there are 11 ideas. It's prioritizing projects that align with city policies, recalibrating Article 80 thresholds, in response to ongoing zoning reform, communicate the city's intention about development projects early and often, which I remember, Lynn, you talked about the fact that when we trigger Article 85, it's already too late. So I wonder how that's something that we can connect. They want to introduce new inclusive methods and formats of engagement different from traditional public meetings. They want to reform advisory groups and build trust. Establish a predictable approach for determining mitigation and community benefits, clear standards and thresholds for planned development areas, and their eligibility, revising the institutional master plan, to serve the needs of institutions and communities, minimizing uncertainty by aligning approval with design development processes, ensuring consistent coordination between Article 80 related permitting departments, which I think is interesting and should be noted, and establishing clear, transparent performance tracking and approval or rejection standards. So I'll stop sharing that one and then, oh, Joe entered. Sorry. And then, you know, I wanted to find something that was that comprehensive for Squares and Streets, and Squares and Streets was a little bit either not comprehensive enough or like 100 pages, very difficult to disseminate. But I did find that they have office hours, I think for Rosendale right now. So I can add those to the calendar if you guys are interested in having those office hours available. But I did note that they had posted a timeline for themselves as well, and I'll share that really quickly. I don't know if you can see that, but it says that they have already started that phase. They're already on their last phase. So I think that's concerning.
We can't see Genesis that.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Let me,
We're able to see the prior one, but not that one.
okay, let me reshare. Okay, can you see that? Thumbs up. Can you see it? Great. Okay. So they have here that they started phase 3 February of 2024, and that they are ending phase 3 this month. And that's the zoning adoption period, which is why I posted and I'm trying to post any zoning board or zoning commission meetings that they're having this month so that we can go to them, because that is a little bit cause for concern. It says here that they want to present to the BPDA board, which I can put any of their meetings that are public on our calendar for approval to petition to the zoning commission on adopting the zoning text amendment. I can send that amendment. I tried to get through it. It was like it's like 100 pages. But yeah, so they are moving much quicker than I anticipated. Wanted to stop there.
Thanks, Hennessy. I do want to get back to Squares and Streets, but since you started with Article 80, should we discuss that a little bit?
Yeah.
I did have a couple of questions, and others probably did too. It seems like they've been having focus groups. You mentioned they met with the development community. We know that they haven't come to this group, obviously, and they haven't come to my organization, the Boston Preservation Alliance. Does anybody know if the Article 80 Steering Committee has met with anyone in the preservation community outside of maybe the Office of Historic Preservation?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, I find that to be unacceptable. I feel like that we deserve a focus group and the opportunity to hear what they're thinking and planning to move forward. It looked like on their little timeline that they were going to be moving directly into the implementation phase. So I'm wondering where's the public process where they present publicly in public meetings and that there's opportunity for questions and feedback and comment letters and all of that? Are they not doing any of that?
I think, let me see, Kevin sent me something from a public meeting that they had, and I think it was in February. But so he sent me a write-up of the public comments, and he also sent me the Zoom meeting, and I watched it, and he also sent me the presentation. And I watched it, and it wasn't really that, I wouldn't say that there was that much engagement from the public. It was very overview based. But there was I'll present what the comments said.
And will you be able to share everything you showed us? Send all that to us in an email so we all
Yeah.
have these links. Great.
Absolutely. And I'll share even more because he sent a whole bunch of things that some of them weren't
Yeah,
great.
he gave us a lot.
Yeah. But some of them are not useful. So I'll send, so this was their February 29th meeting, and the questions that they didn't get to answer. So people asked who are the consultant teams. It says, I guess they answer that. It's whatever. And it says, in what ways is Boston an outlier when it comes to mitigation? And they say it's an outlier because Boston achieves mitigation and community benefits that are larger and wider ranging, which I think is pretty big. And it says, however, Boston also has a very inconsistent process. Most other cities have a more standardized approach, and that's the link to the report that they did that, connects Boston to other cities or reviews Boston against other cities, and I will send that to you guys as well. Says who's behind the change? Is it the city communities or the real estate lobby? How do citizens have input into city policies? Says it has often heard from community members, developer, BPA staff that Article 80 is complicated, unpredictable. They want it to be more transparent. They're excited to modernize this development review process with the public. And it says, will you talk about the intersection between zoning and squares and streets? Article 80 and squares and streets, and it says it's a planning and zoning initiative that focuses on housing, public space, small businesses. Obviously, we know all of this. And it says our planning team is working with community members to determine what new zoning works best in these neighborhood centers. This project is updating the process that new developments undergo as they're reviewed by city staff. It says squares and streets and Article 80 modernization set up a new process for reviewing new development proposed in areas with recently enacted zoning.
Hey,
So
Hennessy, I saw this and I agree with you, it wasn't very helpful, but why don't you send this to everybody so they can
Okay.
read it?
All right,
Because
great.
yeah, it doesn't get into any of the details that I think this
It
group is
doesn't.
really concerned about. But Article 80, it keeps coming up. I don't know if anybody was on the meeting last night for the zoning amendments for Plan Downtown. But it's incredibly relevant, not only to our preservation world, but a lot of the questions that came up with the zoning, the answers we got were, well, we're still going to have Article 80. It'll still go through Article 80. And the pushback was, will it? We don't know. We don't know what's happening to Article 80, and we don't know what degree of engagement the public will have, and how much influence the public will have over projects moving forward. So I think this is incredibly relevant to this committee, and I really would hope that we can get someone to come to speak with us and answer our questions about it. Especially if they're not doing any other sort of public process for that. Any other thoughts though? What are you guys thinking?
Well, I think that, just the nature of some of the downtown buildings, they don't always trigger Article 80. There are many buildings that just don't meet that large, kind of large project, small project
Well, Chelsea,
requirement.
one thing they're changing is that they're going to lower the threshold to 20,000 square feet.
Oh, that's good.
We'll go for review. If I understood it correctly, there's a lot still to understand about what they're proposing.
Yeah.
And they are doing, I'll mention, they are proposing to do a historic character study for downtown, but it's unclear how much teeth that will have, if it's more of a guideline or suggestion of how development should work.
Right. It's not a full study of downtown. It's not a full survey like we had asked.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. And they're not doing survey work. They're doing a study. And Chelsea, am I right to understand there's a consultant that's going to be doing that study?
I don't know. I know that Murray has been attending a lot of the Plan Downtown meetings and saying you really, really need a full survey of this area in order to make decisions about these buildings. I was at the BLC meeting last night, as was Lynn, so I didn't get to go to the Article 80 thing last night, but I would imagine they would hire a consultant.
Well,
So
Murray,
it's
are you
Murray
here?
here.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi,
Great.
Murray.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yes, consultants are going to be involved. And there was a lot of discussion as to what the appropriate level of study of the baseline conditions were. There's been a lot of pushback. on doing a full-fledged historic resource survey. So
Mhm.
rather than having decisions made and recommendations made affecting height, density, and as a result, character, I suggested at the very least they need to have a preservation-based character appraisal, and the purpose of that would be to inform recommendations on appropriate zoning and appropriate height. I'm hoping, and I know that it's been a bit of back and forth, but I'm hoping that it is not seen as an appendix or something that is attached where they can check a box and say, okay, we've done that. It has
Right.
to inform decisions, otherwise it doesn't serve the correct purpose.
100% agree, but it seemed the way it was presented last night, which again was just sort of an overview, so there's a lot of follow-up, that it's going to be included in the plan, but it's not going to be done until after they've already approved the zoning changes. So I don't see how it's going to influence, any of the zoning if it's not done before they get that approved.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, they know the order, but there is some schedule that has been established that actually prevents them from doing things in the appropriate order. And they're concerned, look, they've spent 4.5 years on this, and they have to get it out. And I thought, well, if you spent that much time, an extra 6 months is probably well invested if you get some alignment between understanding the important part of downtown and how that relates to how you are making recommendations on height and density and so forth.
Okay, thanks, Murray. And we may have more questions on that, but I see there are some hands. So Allison, what was your question or comment?
Yeah, hi, everyone. I don't mean to divert the topic, but I'm not sure where I heard this first, but that the entire Office of Historic Preservation and Landmarks will be moving to the planning department, the new planning department. Is that just a rumor or not? I mean, if that happened, wouldn't historic preservation then be getting there'd be a lot more focus on historic preservation in the fact that every neighborhood now and is supposed to be getting a plan? Just a question, I guess.
I don't know if
It's Murray Miller
happening.
again. There are a number of options being discussed, but there has been no decision made as of yet.
But that might be a positive jump. I'm just thinking it might be. Okay.
Well, it has pros and cons. Any of the options have pros and cons. There are positive
right.
aspects which we would certainly like to uplift, and there are also potential adverse effects of any of the various options which we'd like to minimize.
Murray,
Right,
would it
right.
be helpful or appropriate for this to be an agenda item for this committee to talk about and make a recommendation?
I think that recommendation actually comes from perhaps the 5th floor, and it has to do with the incoming chief. So while it might not be such a bad idea, I'm not sure of where it would fit in the current discussions, which have a timeline that's associated with the interim chief as well as the incoming chief, which is likely to be the first part of June.
Okay.
Kenzie and then Lynn.
Yeah, two things. So I just wanted to say, I got in touch with Nipur Manani, who's the deputy director for BPDA, who's overseeing this, and she's committed that they will come to our May meeting of this committee. So we need to let them know. I don't see that on my schedule, so I don't know if we haven't scheduled it yet. Is that right?
I'm
So,
gonna send out something in a couple days.
okay, so we just, as soon as we get that scheduled so that it's not, so that hopefully we can avoid conflicts, but she said they will come. And the other thing is just to say that they actually are about to do another round of stakeholder outreach. And I asked about historic preservation groups, and I did confirm specifically, Allison, that the BPA is on the list. So you should get outreach within the next week on that.
Are you talking, I'm sorry, we talked about several things. Are you talking about the downtown study or the Article 80?
Sorry, I'm back on Article 80. Sorry,
Great.
back on Article 80. So, but I totally agree that I think it would be great to have the BPDA team come and talk to this group in addition to talking to some of the folks on this call and, individually. So that was just my update.
That's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Lynn?
I just wanted to quickly say in reference to our making a recommendation on the ultimate disposition of the landmarks department, and where it lands. I think it would be perfectly appropriate for us. I mean, given our mandate as a committee, to make a series of recommendations on improving, our toolkit. I think it's quite relevant. So.
Jean-Luc?
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick logistics suggestion. I'm hearing a lot of like gathering information and understanding like what timelines are. So if we can perhaps like start to develop a flow chart so that we understand like what are the upcoming points of intervention that we can actually be effective on, then we can have a better grasp, and not just Article 80, but just all the tools in general is what I'm trying to get at, is having some kind of flow chart on each of the tools.
A great point. I actually just created a Google folder for legislation and preservation tools. If you guys are okay with Google as like a place, Google Drive, I'd love to share that with you guys, and that way we can start, I can start putting a flow chart together and putting important documents in there.
Great. So it sounds like this group and some of the other preservation groups will have the opportunity to engage in the Article 80 discussions soon. And then we can put on, maybe for the next meeting, a discussion about the potential of moving OHP into planning. I think we need to gather a little bit more information and hear from staff about that, so that we can have a really informed conversation about that. And then I'd love more information about this downtown study, anything that's available that can be shared. I'd love to know the timeline for that, so that we understand, and any engagement opportunities for the public and the preservation community. And I do plan to follow up with that team, the zoning team, to understand what role this study is going to play in decision making. So I'm happy to try and get some more information and work with Murray on that and the staff to bring back to this group to understand a little bit more about that. So any other questions? I mean, we've run through several topics quickly. Any other questions or thoughts on those things?
I am wondering if the downtown plan zoning changes have a BPDA board date in mind where they would get approved.
I feel like they said they were looking to do it in June, which
Okay.
is
Great.
practically tomorrow.
I know, yeah, but
So that's
hopefully.
concerning. Well, and
Yeah.
then also I wanted to mention with the zoning, another thing, there were several things that I don't fully understand. One, they took out the density bonus model language, so we're not looking at that, which I think is probably a good thing in the long run. They did talk about taking out some of the language, or we have layers of zoning downtown. So there's like the Midtown Cultural District. And there were some aspects that they mentioned they were going to put into Article 85. And that was very confusing to me. So that's something else I want to understand more about, how and why they would add language to Article 85 and to what end. But that was on the table, so I think
That's
there's
weird.
a lot more for us to understand.
Okay, that's
But I will say,
especially concerning.
right. I will say that there was a lot more focus on historic preservation in general at last night's meeting. They mentioned the study. We talked a little bit about survey work, which is not part of this scope, evidently. And they did, we had areas of downtown that were designated as character areas that were going to have lower heights and supposedly an extra degree of review or protection. They've renamed them Sky and Sky Low. So the character areas are now Sky Low. And again, I'm not quite sure the reasoning behind that. So there's more to learn and understand, but happy to work with anybody offline about that as we try and gather more information.
Sounds good.
Great. Any further thoughts? Yep, Jean-Luc.
Yeah, I'm reviewing some of the documents that were related to the convening last night, and I was curious about the removal of the Midtown Cultural District. Is that just sort of like a rebranding, or what was the utility of removing the Midtown Cultural District?
I wish I could answer that. My understanding that one of the goals of this process was to streamline zoning a little bit so that we didn't have so many overlay districts. But they said they're not getting rid of overlay districts completely. There's going to be historic overlay districts. Again, it's unclear what that
But
is.
those are, I mean, we have some of those, but they're very few and far between. So there aren't that many of them, basically.
So it's unclear to me. I just know they talked about putting some of the language into Article 85. So they have office hours they've put online you can sign up for, so I plan to try and get some more clarity. And I hope
Yeah.
others will as well.
Yeah, I will also do that, because I think adding anything to Article 85 is, I don't even understand what that would be.
Well, Article 85, I think, is what we wanted to talk most about today. But before we switch over, oh, and I did have an update on Squares and Streets. So I met with some of those working on that. And had a very positive conversation. They are doing some cultural resource mapping. So there's more to come out on that they haven't really put out there yet. But my understanding is they are trying to do some maps of where there are historic resources, cultural resources, character contributing resources. So there will be an opportunity for residents to engage in those planning efforts and indicate what places matter to them.
Right.
And that will be produced on a map, which will live on the city's website. So I was encouraged by that.
Yeah, I actually think that came from you and Amanda. I think, because about a month ago, I gave them the examples of maps that you guys had given me. And I said, can you just like quickly get these in here? And I don't know if I don't know if that's why they're in there now, but they might be. So thank you for that.
It's something that we push. I mean, I know we've all been pushing on survey work and maps, but I know that I was on the Design Vision Community Advisory Board, and we did start with what's already there and what do people care about. And I really urged them to do the same thing in Squares and Streets, but Squares and Streets moves so quickly out of the gate
Yeah.
that I was worried that work wasn't being done. But it sounds like it is being done, and there will be more opportunity to engage in that way. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that we will all engage in Squares and Streets by helping to identify places that are meaningful.
Great.
All right, Hennessy, should we switch over to Article 85?
Yes, let's do it. Invited some OHP staff to talk through their experiences with Article 85 and some reform. Joe's here, which is great. But I wanted to talk really quickly because I was looking through some things, and before Susan Casino retired, she was working on obviously the deconstruction initiative. And she got together a group of people to start Article 85 because she really thought that Article 85 would go hand in hand with the Zero Waste Initiative. And so she wanted an Article 85 specific subcommittee of the Legislation and Preservation Tools Subcommittee. I think we're already a pretty small group, so I don't know if that's if we need to do that, but she had been working on a deconstruction ordinance, and I'm not sure where she ended up on that, but I want to potentially follow up with people that she was working with to see if she had a draft that she shared.
That's a great,
I was working with her on that,
Yeah.
through Mass DEP, so I can fill in on that. Do we know if her position's been filled?
I'm not sure. I'll double check.
but can I just ask if you were on that? There isn't one yet, right? Like there's no ordinance for
Mm.
deconstruction for the city.
So no,
Correct.
Susan was working on a pilot of sort of voluntarily doing deconstruction for different projects, and we were trying to encourage projects where the buildings were coming down to do deconstruction. A couple of them did.
Mhm.
There's a working group with Mass DEP working on deconstruction and salvage. We're putting together some charrettes. We'll do one in Boston coming up sooner rather than later. And the idea is to take policies from other cities that are already working. We know San Antonio, we know Portland, Oregon have deconstruction and salvage ordinances that are successful. So let's learn from those. We've been looking a lot at the infrastructure here in Boston. Do we have enough places that take salvage and make it available for reuse? How do we incentivize deconstruction and salvage? What's an ordinance look like? How do we create that supply and demand? So we've been having robust conversations around that. And the next step is to bring people into a room together to come up with some draft policy recommendations for Boston.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think that's where Susan's head was at. She thought that I think it makes sense to have a city side working group be regrouped to identify city partners that are willing to work with us. I mean, obviously it's an environmental it's a climate change tool, so that's going to be important, but so that was one thing. And another thing that I found when I was looking at Article 85 and what some of the staff members had raised as a concern was that Article 85 states that BLC staff shall determine that a building is significant if A, the building is listed in the Landmark Commission's Comprehensive Preservation Survey. And the issue that they raised with that is that the Landmark doesn't have a comprehensive preservation survey. So outside of demo delay being a thing, not being sufficient, they noted that it's just that it's much more difficult to determine significance in such a short amount of time because they don't have the survey that the ordinance says they'll have, or the zoning code says that they'll have.
It's appearing more and more that there is a need for a citywide survey. It's just, with everything that is to be done, like it's a massive undertaking, but like it's something that absolutely needs to be done. So how can we direct resources to at least start taking some action steps towards that?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody here agrees that that's what we need, is a comprehensive citywide survey. And it's something that I know we've been advocating for years, decades. It's complicated for a number of reasons, budget being just one of them. So some of the alternatives we've been with MHC doing neighborhoods sort of piecemeal. I think they're in East Boston right now. They did Roxbury, Rightland. So, but by the time you get all the way around, then the ones you started with are now 30 years old. So, and things become more significant over time. So that's not ideal. the other way we're doing it is, you know, now we're doing quasi survey in downtown, and then we're doing somewhat survey related work in these squares and streets neighborhoods. So that also is very piecemeal. And then we talked, I don't know if you were here when Chief White Hammond mentioned that there was a concept at the city of working a citywide survey of not only historic preservation, but of art and other things that other groups are advocating for, which I thought was a really interesting idea. She said it's kind of on the back burner for right now with everything else going on. But to me, that concept is more likely to get funded than just a preservation survey. So I'd kind of like for us to push on that a little bit more.
Yeah. And when I was doing research, I found that there was a Article 85 task force, but that was a little while ago now, maybe seven years ago.
Yeah, and we actually have all those documents that they created. Roseanne has very dutifully sort of put them in a folder. And I've been reading some of that material, which just sounds like they were just pushing for a time extension, kind of like as a stopgap.
Mhm.
Well, I have,
But I'm not all the way through all that material. And I think Lynn definitely, and probably all of you were part of it.
It was actually started, it was a subcommittee of the commission, so it was made up of commission members and staff. And I don't remember that there was anyone outside of the department who participated, but
we were there if it's the same task force that we were part of.
you're right, Allison. Was there anybody else represented? Any other
I
entity?
think Allison Poltonus was at those meetings, but yeah, it was a small group.
But Allison, if you're still here, you're wonderful. You're at everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I
But
did have-
after many meetings, and not really making any progress, I think we kind of lost, hope.
Yeah, so I think that task force, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the last big or organized effort to do Article 85. I think that there were some internal conversations at City Hall with certain staffers since then, but as far as I know, nothing really progressed. And
There
then
was a draft that was developed by someone at the BPDA that actually BLC staff had no participation in, was my understanding.
yeah, I think that's right. But there wasn't anything publicly discussed or advanced at all. So I have a document that we put together that just has two columns. One was sort of the concerns or problems with Article 85 and then how we would address them. Happy to go through that if we want to sort of start the conversation there. But I think, well, we need to think about big picture. Does this group want to recommend changes to Article 85? And do we want to get into the weeds of what those changes would be? Do we all agree we want to keep Article 85? Big picture, what are our thoughts on Article 85 in general? Is our end goal to recommend changes?
Well, I think that, I mean, just sort of tracking it logically, I think you need it to exist until there's a really good survey and a really good survey process of updating and things like that. So I think it has to still fill that space in between accomplishing a very expensive survey and getting the city to be behind that, and then trying to prevent as few significant demos in the process by making Article 85 work better for now.
Okay, Lynn?
I agree with Chelsea, and I think at our last meeting, we had talked about what can we do would be relatively easy to sell and it could be done relatively quickly. And I think modifications to the existing Article 85, and I think it's pretty obvious what they need to be, might have a better chance of kind of seeing us through short term until, as Chelsea suggests, something bigger and better and perhaps more comprehensive that might incorporate some climate action, a component as well down the road. But we had a landmarks meeting last night and we had an Article 85 application, and I don't know about you, Chelsea, but I was interested that no one chose to, the commission chose not to impose a delay, which never used to happen. And I just wondered if that was a reflection of our feeling that, because it was a charming house that fit right into the streetscape, that's had some interesting history, just recognition of the futility of Article 85 in its current form.
Yeah, I felt
Kind of
that.
like given up on it. Yeah,
Yeah, it just has a hopeless feeling to it, and
it does.
no matter how
Yeah.
well I try to prep it, it just feels like the building is doomed. No
Oh, yeah,
matter.
and that's,
It just consumes so much staff time. Yours primarily, Chelsea, that could be better deployed.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and that's no commentary on staff. I think you guys do a great job, but I don't engage with Article 85 much anymore because it just doesn't seem worth the time. We don't get a lot of wins out of it, but
No.
Allison?
Yeah, I mean, the thing to change is the timing of when it happens. And so that's a zoning issue. So it has to happen in the pre-file. It has to happen before they go to the zoning board. It has to happen before the community process with abutters and so on. So, and that's almost more significant than whether it's 6 months or 12 months. Because so often it feels doomed because everything else has already preceded it and it's an afterthought.
Correct. On the other hand, there is some logic to asking for an applicant to have a real set of drawings ready. So you don't want to just be approving demos all over the place without knowing that something at least thoughtful is going in its place. But I think you're right. I think the best policy would be if we could get Article 85 to happen first.
Jean-Luc?
Yeah, just to jump in, one thing that I wanted to pick up from previous conversations was the level of equity that we're fostering, with whatever angle we're going for. Like, are there perceived disparities when it comes to low-income communities, places that are stewarded by minorities or women? How do we actually have some parity within the situation in terms of organizations or communities that need to assert cases to prevent demolition?
I mean, I think that there's definitely disparity. I think the fact that any survey that we have doesn't necessarily cover all of Boston and only covers certain places. I mean, for example, Chelsea was looking at a place 270 Warren, and it's down the street from me, and I see it all the time. But it's not something that we had to do research for to find that it was significant. It's not something that we had on hand, and I think one thing that demo delay is good for is when communities who find a building important, who realize it's at risk, have time, right? If you don't have money, you need time. You need time to fundraise, you need time to research, you need time to do the work that could save this building. I think about the Harriet Tubman House when I say this, because they really tried, right? But I think, what we saw from the BPDA is that they don't feel like community members don't feel like they're part of the BPDA process. And I'm from Roxbury, and I would say even more so. I think that the way that the BPDA engages with Roxbury doesn't work for us, because we find out after the fact, after this building that we all love, or this thing, mural or whatever we all love is already gone. So I think there are disparities and perceived disparities because of the length of demo delay is too short, or because the historic research surveys or the surveys that we do have are very incomplete. So we know that already. And that's something that affects communities, some communities more than others. And so I do think there is something to be said for how to use these things to be equitable and how to go for parities. And parity, for the most part, you need to overcorrect before you get there. You can't just get there, you have to overcorrect.
Right.
So then even out. So yeah, I don't know.
I think the strongest argument for that, with the exception of a couple of our districts, is that a lot of our districts are, mainly white, mainly big money, and so allowing Article 85 to be effective gives a parity, maybe not quite parity, but it gives a tool to put in place in neighborhoods that are not, Back Bay or Beacon Hill or whatever. So I think it would answer those problems. And, I could probably print out a report with statistics, but I think that right now we're kind of losing a lot of East Boston. We're losing a lot of Roxbury. We're losing, this doesn't work with the parity argument, but we're losing a shocking amount of West Roxbury. That's like I feel like every application I looked at this week was in West Roxbury. So I think it's a smart angle to help our argument, Jean-Luc, where making this tool better in places that are not historic districts is a leveling tool.
Joe?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Cornish. I'm Director of Design Review, and I usually have a conflict with this this committee with other hearings. So it's nice to meet you all. I just to tag on to what Chelsea had mentioned. I think in addition to Article 85, creating more historic districts, because just to remember that when there is a demolition in a local historic district, that doesn't go through the Article 85 process. That gets reviewed by the district commission. So I think we're so in such a good place now to have the Highland Park Architectural Conservation District, because that has really helped control a lot of demolition in that area of Roxbury that had so much pressure on it. But again, there's still a lot of work that has to be done with Article 85. But I think also, the survey is so important, identifying other districts, and then that is just a stronger tool, I think, to create these districts. And then those proposed demolitions have to go through a different review process.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So I think there's a lot of different aspects of Article 85 that we should talk about if we're ready to get into the weeds and start preparing our recommendations. If it's okay, Hennessy, maybe I'll show that chart as just a way to organize our thoughts.
Mhm.
Not to say that that these are the recommendations that this group wants to make, but just as a starting point to have further dialogue. Let me make sure I can share.
Should we go to?
Yeah. Is it? Here we go. Okay. So like we said, we were part of, in March 2019, you see on this document, we just put together some thoughts based on these task force meetings we were having on the major challenges we were seeing with Article 85 and some proposed changes. So maybe this is just a way to organize the conversation and start talking about what our actual concrete recommendations might be. Everybody seeing that chart though?
Mhm.
So I can start running through these, but feel free to jump in. The first and most glaring to us was that we call it demolition delay when the goal is not to just delay demolition, it's to find alternatives to demolition. So we were suggesting changing the names to better reflect what our goals were. Thoughts on that?
I think that makes sense. I think it's like similar to what Mary had presented. If we reframe it from delay, then we kind of reframe how we think about what it will do.
Yeah, I think Allison, I think other communities in Massachusetts have done that too, so that's probably good to see. And it sounds crazy, but that type of rebranding does go a long way. At least for developers to think like we're more of a partner than someone that's just going to be in the way.
Exactly. I don't off the top of my head know of a suggestion of what to change it to. We had demolition alternatives review, but anybody have anything front of mind, or we can think about that? Well, Joe, why don't we see what some of the other places have done, and see if we like any of their.
Yeah, when I lived in Belmont, I remember we had a big discussion, and of course, I can't remember what we ended up coming with, but I think one of the words or one of the titles was a historic preservation ordinance, but that was too far because that
Mhm.
really turned people off. So I think we got to be careful about that.
Yeah, I think it should be something like rehabilitation review or reuse review, or something that indicates we're trying to find ways to reuse the existing building on the site. Because that's our end goal, right? Is to try and not have demolition. So let's think about that a little bit, see if there's other names out there that we like, or if we want to think of something our own. So the next one was proponents poorly present the historic resource or alternatives to demolition to the community, focusing on the replacement design, often combining the required public meeting for Article 80 and Article 85. So if you've attended these meetings in the past, you've seen, like I have, that, it's very quickly, well, we have this old decrepit building, but look at our shiny new project, and this is going to do so many great things for the neighborhood. And they skew the perspective to try and get support for the new project. So I don't feel like that's an appropriate way to present these projects. So we said proponents' presentations will be pre-approved by staff to assure the history and significance of the site, as well as adequate alternatives to demolition be clearly presented at the community meeting. Maybe some of this is already happening. Lynn?
I've always felt that part of the process is kind of pointless because the proponents typically they're not historians. They don't always know how to perform the research. And they're mostly trying to argue that, well, this building really isn't historic after all, or they don't know and are offering up condition. I would almost just allow staff, not ask the proponent to address historic significance.
So
Yeah.
that's a good question. If staff, do you guys have the bandwidth to present the history and significance in an Article 85 process?
Yeah, we do. We do it. We only have
Yeah.
10 days to do it, so it's not, I'm sorry, I'm trying to, at the same time I'm on this call, I'm like trying to figure out if my kid got into an exam school, so my ex-husband keeps texting me. So I'm sorry, I'm a little scattered. We make our case, we are allowed to make our case. And then for some reason, the ordinance script like hands the mic over to the lawyer who is representing the client usually, and he or she will give a scathing review of the house on, look at this horrible basement, and they show pictures of the interior of the basement, and look at this, they take terrible pictures of the house, and they don't have any sense of like how to look at a historic atlas or how to look up census reports of who lived there, what were they, who were these people. So I never understand that part of the script where we give our like professional opinion and then we're like, oh no, you go too, you go ahead. So I would be nice if that wasn't part of that.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the alternatives, and it is so hard to get good realistic alternatives to demolition through these applications. And I don't know how many, I haven't really dealt directly at Chelsea deals more directly in the staff architect, but the few that I've been involved with, we'll have applicants that'll say, all right, here's an alternative demolition. We're not going to demolish it. That's an alternative. Well, yes, but no, because that's not what you're going to do. And, we've had, quite a bit of pushback sometimes from the law department on that of, well, that is an alternative. Or I think one time we had someone saying, well, we're going to move the building. All right, where are you going to move it to? They didn't have an idea, but they were going to move it. But, I think there needs to be a lot more clarity on the expectation of what we're looking for an alternative, a realistic alternative.
Yeah, so in my mind, there's two options for that. Maybe you have an idea for another. One is, if we talk about extending the delay to 2 years, then that compels them to find an acceptable alternative. If you can come to the plate right away with an acceptable alternative, you're done. If you're not willing to do that, then you have to wait out the 2 years. So that could solve that problem to an extent. The other thing on my mind, and then Amanda, I'll give it to you. So my advocacy has revolved around requiring some of this work to be done in Article 80. So when you file your PNF, you need to include alternatives to demolition, not just for historic buildings, but all buildings. From an environmental perspective and affordability perspective, you have to show why tearing down that building is better than reusing what's there and adding on to it. So I think if we wanted to use that angle, then that aspect would be in Article 80. It would be a requirement for all projects. Amanda?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Just taking it back a step, thinking about the question around establishing the historic significance, and maybe we can take some ideas from like a Section 106 review and say, ask, like, one of the requirements is a Form B, right? So, and we had that happen once in Charlestown, and it was amazing. I mean, they submitted like 30 pages of and they hired a company to do it, and it was just one house that they did it on. So it's not prohibitive, but if they came prepared with that type of research to that level, that would not only document the building for, posterity if it does end up going down, but it kind of meets the requirement of, having the right research and somebody like doing a sort of deeper dive than what a lawyer wants to present with, bad photographs. So I don't know if there's a way to incorporate kind of some of that language and just say, this is what's required to, show up and prove historic significance. And maybe even it has to come with the application. So Chelsea isn't, scrambling to do that research in 10 days, but it shows up with the application.
I think that's an interesting idea, Amanda. I'm curious on thoughts of two thoughts maybe. One, I think it would have to be very prescriptive of what we're requiring, because they're, like, as we said, they're going to try and prove that it's not significant and it's in terrible shape. So we'd have to be very clear about that. But also, I'm thinking about cost. If we propose something that requires the proponents to hire another professional and pay someone else, will we get pushback on that? And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the fight we want to fight.
I'm sure we'll get pushback. We'll get pushback on any of this. But again, just like Chelsea, like when there's a demolition delay in Charlestown, we scramble and, we'll do the research and the Form B and everything, like, just for free. So if that were to happen in Charlestown, I know not every neighborhood has these resources, but, we would be able to do that for, the neighbors who kind of, we just do it voluntarily, but we would be able to do that for somebody. So it wouldn't necessarily be a cost involved in all cases.
Okay.
Well, it's so funny because even when a consultant is hired, it's not always a slam dunk.
Yeah.
I'm thinking recently that we had a pretty well-known firm prepare reports for 6 buildings on one property. And when I was way down the rabbit hole, I realized that Joe helped me realize that 4 of the properties had already been through the process and didn't even need demo delay application. So it's it's just such a tricky thing. I don't know. But I think there would be when I look at what I normally get, which is an owner / builder application, not a huge builder, like not a huge developer. I think that person would find more requirements onerous. However, those are the people knocking down buildings. So
Right.
why should we care if it's
Yeah.
onerous?
I mean, I think there's a way to do sort of a bare minimum and say, okay, here is a link to Atlas Scope. We want to see, screenshots of,
Sure.
the oldest maps where your building appears, or, something like that. So they have to visually describe that it is something that they could do it, themselves, but
Yeah.
we could Chelsea could easily look and say, oh gosh, this building is somewhere between 100 years old or 125. That in itself is significant.
Mhm.
And, I mean, I teach people all the time to do it themselves, but, somebody, especially if a lawyer is involved, can do that, chain of ownership research and get back to, that original deed that shows the parcel and then the building on it. So, those people are already involved. They have the know-how to do it. So I think there's a way to do sort of some easy things that would technically be DIY, but not necessarily a full form if that's going to be prohibitive.
Yeah. Allison?
Yeah, hi. Going back to what you said previously about making it part of Article 80, and I'm thinking not so much about the history of a site, but more about the environmental cost of taking down the building and having that as part of the application, that the assessed carbon value, the unique quality of the stonework or something like that, but just that there really isn't maybe Article 85 isn't supposed to be one size fits all, so that you have categories of project sizes or parcel sizes, so that there's a different way to evaluate them, but also just thinking again of how to push this into the realm of climate change tools and deconstruction, that conversation that you had earlier in the meeting.
Can I respond to that a little bit, Allison?
Yeah.
So Nick from our office is sort of more savvy with things like technology in general, but so he's actually built a model where we could have something called the CARES tool, which helps you measure,
Embodied carbon, yeah.
carbon waste. And he put together a model where we can have that as part of our analysis of the applications. However, I did one and it took me forever. And I thought, why am I doing this? This should be the responsibility of the applicant to do this.
Right.
And I'm sure we could create something in the application that would allow them to use the CARES tool pretty easily.
Absolutely, Chelsea. So the Alliance helped get funding for the CARE tool, and we've been promoting it. And my thought was, again, it would be part of Article 80 for all projects, not
Right.
just ones that qualify for Article 85. You've got to prove why, losing the embodied carbon and energy in that existing structure is better for the environment. And I think a lot of our problems would be solved right there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so I definitely think that the CARE tool is an important component, whether we use it at 80 or 85. Kinsey?
Yeah, and by the way, guys, I'm battling a bad cold, so sorry to keep going off screen. I was just thinking, I think, and it relates to what you were just saying, Chelsea. I think that there's a distinction between like things that just like someone needs to do a bunch of legwork, but it's like, the tool, right, is going to spit out the answer based on the correct information, and putting that on the developer makes sense. I think that every time you put on a developer like to hire someone who they're gonna pay to make a neutral case, right? It's just hard. Like it's just like it's not in the consultant's interest. So to me, like trying to break down, like, you know, somebody you mentioned, right? But sort of saying like, you know, here are the 10 tools that we use to go look at the history of a site, right? Like you need to like provide all the things that you find about this site in these 10 tools, right? Like, you know, Atlas Scope and this database and that database and whatever, or certify that you searched and you didn't find anything, right? And I also think that there's a world in which if we had that list, you could also use you could augment whatever the entity was doing with a little bit of crowdsourcing, right? Like I don't think you take the developer off the hook, but you could put on a public thing like, hey, if you're interested in a site and a demo delay, you know, or demo alternatives review process, here are the tools that we use to learn about the history of a site. And let, you know, and just like let interested people go and look at those and see what they find and kind of feel equipped for the hearing. I don't know. That's just I which I think would be a belt and suspenders. I think if we just put stuff on crowdsourcing, it would be super variable depending on the neighborhood.
Right.
But I think that the idea of like I'm also like as a historian, I like the like educational idea of like teaching people about what the resources are that we have to explore the history of our places in Boston. So I think like there could be a cool way to make that into a set of tools that kind of like open up like a road in for citizen historians in general. I don't know. That was my thought.
Well, Kinsey, there is, I'm pretty sure I've seen a list on the Landmarks website of resources like Digital Commonwealth and Atlas Scope. I don't know if it's completely up to date or not, but
Probably not.
like I don't know if the CARE tools on it, but so that's something I think we could look at. And maybe we need to have like a video guide of someone showing you how to use these tools so that it's that much clearer. But I wonder the other side of that coin, so whether or not they prove significance, we still want to see alternatives. Chelsea, do you feel like they come to the table equipped to, we know we don't see the alternatives we want. I've always assumed it's because they are not interested in it. Do you feel like they're able to come up with a creative and appropriate alternatives, or do we need a guide on how to do that?
I would say for the most part, they are not equipped to do it. And even when they do it, there is no teeth to it. Like there is a recent applicant ran through some alternatives with us during a hearing and just said, well, we don't really have any appetite to do what you're suggesting. And that was directly involved with, you know, how much money they could make off of their proposed project versus the alternative. So
Yeah.
I think it's a very skewed deck of cards that you're given. Like, of course they don't want to do this. They have already done their due diligence. They know how to maximize the lot for the best return on their investment. And it's silly that we ask them to do that. I have yet to see alternatives that have been chosen by the owner. I've only been here for a year and a half, but I just don't think it's very likely.
It's not common in my experience, but that's why I wonder if we had some way to assist. I know at the Alliance, oftentimes, well, we don't really have it written down because it is so variable, but we say, if you're doing a facade project, here's what we feel like is appropriate. If you're doing an addition, here's the setback we're looking for. If we had and I don't know if you have any of this written down or you just do it verbally or whatever, but if we had a little bit more expectation around what those alternatives really should be, would we get better results? I don't know. But we had
Maybe. And I shared with my colleagues that BPDA Urban Design does have a little like kit of parts that they use to explain things. And I think they're really lovely. Like it's very cartoonish, but it's very effective. Like this is what a setback is. This is what a dormer is. This is what a, you know, whatever. I think when it comes to Article 85, we're a little bit past that. I mean, we're talking about real thoughtful design And usually when I make suggestions to an applicant, they listen, but they don't ever put it to paper because it doesn't net the money that they want to net.
Yeah, so maybe that goes back to compelling them to do it in a more serious way with a longer delay or other penalties. But
Yeah.
Jean-Luc, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I just listening to the conversation, it makes me go take a step back to the title question, because I'm wondering like what our assumptions are about the trajectory of development or preservation within Boston. Like, I'm hearing a lot in terms of like how I really appreciate the imagery of how skewed the process is, and there's a lot of burden that's being carried by community organizations that are not equipped. They're not historians. Again, it goes back to parity, but then it's also sort of like it makes me sort of interrogate, well, what is the overall vision? Like, what are we, when we're looking, towards like Boston at its 400th anniversary, like what is the city that we're going to be looking at? Because it feels like there is absolutely a skewed process, and it's skewed more towards demolition and then redevelopment. So I just want to kind of like gauge like what are our assumptions and what is our overall vision.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I don't think that we should have a system where a developer sees a maybe larger than average size lot and gets to pounce on the development opportunity there. I think we need a much more of a preservation frontline within our policy.
Yeah, at the Alliance, we always say we're not here to stop change, and we're not against development or new construction. We're here to mitigate change, and we're here to promote thoughtful designs and contextual new development. So in my mind, that's what we're here to do. We know the city is going to continue to grow and evolve, and that's not a bad thing. That's why we have the beautiful layers of architecture that we have. But how do we make sure that what we're adding to the city is really quality design and materials in our neighborhoods that have that historic context? Other thoughts on that before we move to Amanda's question? I think it's a good question to think about. So maybe we'll come back to that next time after we've all pondered it a little bit more.
Yeah. I can sort of bridge what we were just talking about with the points I was gonna make, but stepping back and just really trying to think about, what we're trying to do with all of this change. Kind of leads back to Jean-Luc's point, what do we want this to look like? Who do we want to be, at Boston 400 and beyond? And to me, that sort of brings back to the topic of deconstruction. And I think based on that, like even with deconstruction, the building is still going away, right? The significance is still going away. And so to me, that deconstruction topic belongs in Article 80 rather than 85. And then another thing that I think we really haven't touched on is that, a developer coming in and saying, well, I'm going to replace this one single family house with 9 units or something like that, it really contributes to the affordability crisis, right? So there was a project recently that we looked at that it was, a developer came in and had this really great proposal for 4 units as an addition to the back of a historic building. And it's a big lawsuit now because another developer swooped in and convinced the owner to sell to him because he could put 9 units on, which he can't. He has to get 7 variances or something. So I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But he convinced, that owner that he could pay a higher price because he could put more units on than he actually can. Like he doesn't have permission to do any of it. So again, like that raises the price of, you know, everything going forward in the little neighborhood and the surrounding area. So, you know, now the next sale is based on that price. That's, you know, it's not even going to happen. So, I think affordability crisis is worth mentioning too. And some of this somehow, it's probably a stretch, but you know, it's a real concern.
It's not a stretch at all. We talk about NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing.
Yeah.
And naturally occurring affordable housing exists in our existing building stock. Every time we tear one down, what goes back up is always more expensive to
Yep.
buy or rent. And maybe we get more units, but at what price? So
Right.
Right. And
that
I would
is
say,
completely relevant.
Mhm.
I would also add just that what we see in Article 85 is usually just below the threshold of requiring an affordable unit. So
Yep.
it's 6 units, not
That's
7.
why I said 9 units, because
Yep.
he doesn't want to do the 10, which is the requirement, you know?
I think, and so Amanda, the messaging that I've been using for the last few years is of course, historic preservation and historic character, but we talk a lot more these days about climate action and affordability, because in my mind, all roads lead to reusing what we already have.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I think that deconstruction again belongs in Article 80 conversation rather than Article 85, because again, the building's still going away, right?
Yep. I agree. And also because we should deconstruct every building, not just ones that are old.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, materials that can be reused, then that should be the requirement,
Mhm.
regardless of its age or historic significance. But Murray?
Thanks. I was just listening to the conversation, and I'm reminded of the vision for historic preservation in Boston that we are in the process of presenting. And I really do think it's going to be important to consider how we can align preservation objectives with initiatives that have some traction. If we continue to consider Article 85 as a preservation tool, we will be having this discussion many years down the road. There are initiatives within the city that have and that will have a great sense of urgency. There are ways that we could align recommendations with that urgency. And I think it's important that we think of whatever we call it, but it needs to be attached to climate action. It needs to be attached to something that the city has acknowledged and considers to be urgent. Otherwise, if we're going to attach it to significance, consider we're looking multiple years, if not decades, before we have the baseline data in order to be able to have an effective tool. But even those places that do have surveys, demolition delay is not an effective preservation tool. So I would encourage everyone to think more boldly, think in terms of a sense of urgency, and consider how recommendations can gain strength by attaching to other initiatives that will allow us to get much further down the path.
Murray, I think that's fair. And we touched on it at a previous meeting of, I think we can think ideally what we want all of this to look like, but then we need to think very strategically about where we're going to get political traction, and how we can fold into some of these existing processes like squares and streets and zoning reform to make sure that this gets off the ground. Because we've been, as we've said, we've been working on this for years and years and really not gotten anywhere. And I think we have an opportunity right now while so many things are changing to plug into some of those initiatives. So I do think it's important to think about strategy, but we are out of time for today. I really appreciate this conversation. I think we made a lot of progress. We only got to point 2, And we got 16 on here, but what I'd like to do is maybe Hennessy, you can share this document so you guys can just sort of peruse it and maybe add on to it. Other issues that have come up since 2019, like deconstruction wasn't really something we talked about then, so and maybe some other ideas on the right side of how we might implement changing so that we can hit the ground running at our next meeting and continue this conversation. Hennessy, anything else we need to touch on before we wrap up?
No, I think that's everything. You can send me that document and I will compile that with all the other documents that I presented. And I sent you guys a folder. So let me know if you have trouble accessing it, but I will put all of our information there. And I also started a document where I put some of the stuff that we just discussed. And I started a flowchart doc. Doesn't have anything yet, but it's there. Yeah, so that's all. I want to adjourn the meeting.
Hennessy, do you know when we'll know when the next meeting is, or if we have a tentative idea?
Yes, so I will actually be sending out, I think Doodle I've been using Doodle and it's been working much better for people. So I'll send out a Doodle tomorrow with some times with it'll be a lot of dates. So I'll send 3, 1 for each month. I do them in batches because it's a little difficult to schedule so far in advance with so many people, but I'll do those and I'll do tomorrow so that we can have them ready to go.
Great, thank you. And I know we touched on several other things at the beginning of the meeting, so if any of that you guys want to make sure we get on a future agenda, we're Lydia and the other co-chair, we're touching base with Hennessy about agendas in advance, so let us know what you think this group should talk about. Otherwise, we'll continue to work on Article 85 and some survey conversations.
Yeah, you can email me as well, or commemoration@boston.gov. That still goes to me. So, so yeah. All right, motion to adjourn, someone?
So moved.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Hennessy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Oh, I gotta crop that. Thank you, Jay Lee. All right, let me. Penn Station in New York. Oh, cool. Oh, yeah. Now let me end this meeting. Joey. Stop.